Hi, I'm Radio and I'm here with Clas, and we're going to be commentating this Mount Battle Round 3 match between Oops and Nnico.
Hello, hello.
So, right here off the bat, we see Nnico once again running what is likely just screens with Heracross, something that he has recently shown in the Citadart Invitational as well. Oopsgtg running what we would expect to be a fairly standard Metalati Zap team, but we'll have to see exactly what the sets are in running this. One of the major things to keep in mind here, though, is that looking at the Raikou, we don't know yet what exactly its set is. Calm Mind is a very common set in order to set up and sweep against teams, though I have seen other people running screens on them. With Nnico, it's entirely possible it screens as well, so he has dual setters in order for the team set composition that he has currently. On Oop's team, we're probably more likely to see the Calm Mind set, however.
The biggest thing I would like to point out is that Tyranitar here, especially with it being able to threaten pretty much every single thing on Oops' team with that Dragon Dance plus Rock Slide, Ancient Power, and that Earthquake, especially with the double Levitate core here with Zapdos and Latias, especially with that light screen, as you mentioned, that's likely going to be shown here because of how often Nnico likes to use that. Also, that Starmie is really threatening for the Tauros here, which would otherwise try and threaten Tyranitar before it can even get that Dragon Dance up. There is, of course, that MetaCross that can always just use whatever sets it has to stop Tyranitar from setting up, but as soon as Nnico gets that Tyranitar going, we might just see some devastating outcomes because of it.
Yeah, so we should be getting into the match now here. Both of them likely finishing up their team preview as we get ready to go. Here, I would expect most likely from Nnico, we're going to see a very standard lead of likely Latias and maybe Heracross in order to get the screen to offense going quickly, or with another mon like Tyranitar due to its good matchup into the team. With Oops, there's a lot of variation, but we see Zapdos and MetaCross versus Starmie and Raikou.
And what is really scary about that MetaCross here is it's able to just threaten so much damage here depending on what set it is. Of course, that Zapdos is also there threatening up that Starmie, but the biggest thing here is going to be that MetaCross, especially threatening that Earthquake. It's completely unchallenged with Zapdos not taking any damage, while Earthquake can hit whatever it wants. Zapdos is scaring off that Latias and that Zapdos with that potential hidden power Ice. So Nnico really does not want to be switching here, potentially just losing either Pokemon, as well as potentially just seeing that Media Mash coming out, picking up the KO, and just ignoring Raikou's threat entirely.
Yeah, so Oops is put in an interesting position here because he has probably a little bit of the initiative, but Nnico, if he calls the play right, can do decently here. Just goes for a double protect, seeing what comes out. But great punish from Oops, just setting up the light screen, putting the Metagross in an even more favorable position.
And while it is likely that Metagross will be very easily scouted here, thanks to Earthquake, we still don't know what set it is because no damage has been dealt yet. So Oops still has that potential bluff here, being able to pull a double switch here maybe, or even just a single switch on that Raikou to say the Zapdos or the Latias in the back, pulling it with a Rock Slide or even a Media Mash, as well as threatening a lot of damage. As we see the Raikou going to Latias, Reflect goes up, and Starmie is just completely OHKO'd from that Thunderbolt. Heracross coming out as a replacement. And we do see that Earthquake yet again. That is not Choice Band damage, however, which is very important to note here.
Yeah, so we see Nnico did probably get what he wanted out of that team, that turn, a Reflect, which we do now know that he is running the dual setters with Starmie as one of his setters. Here, though, we're likely going to see a Swagger into the Heracross, because that is a common set that Nnico has been running in order to get the damage boosting on it. However, without the light screen up, it's still decently threatened by a Thunderbolt plus a double up with Metagross, so it's hard to say how passive or aggressive Nnico can really play here.
Another thing is to mention that Tyranitar just has not been brought here. There is no threat here that Nnico's brought to potentially win the game on the spot, not recognizing how deadly it is, or instead recognizing that maybe Oops has put a lot of thought into trying to prevent it altogether. We do see that Meteor Mash on turn 3 completely missing Heracross, allowing Brick to remove that light screen, allowing Latias to potentially threaten that Zapdos. Ice Beam also doing a huge chunk of damage, nearly doing 40%. Thunderbolt taking off 50% of Heracross's health. We do also now know that Heracross is that slow, bulky variant being outsped by MetaCross as it falls, with Raikou coming out to replace it.
Oops,
Turn
once
5.
again there on turn 4 though, just calls the Latias protecting, goes for another light screen. That turn Nnico could have gotten rid of the Zapdos because no Ice Beam would have killed at that range. Instead, just gets a free kill on the Heracross, another light screen set up.
Now, with turn 5 about to be commencing, we see that light screen Ice Beam Latias set. Carmine is revealed on the Raikou, but is it going to be enough? Earthquake will be coming out in a minute as we sit here. Earthquake is revealed on that MetaCross, doing 60%. That is a considerably lower amount than what would be expected from that MetaCross. That is that jolly nature showing off that damage weakening as well as the reflect from Nico's side here. However, that is still not doing much here because of Raikou taking so much damage. Yes, it has that leftovers, but as seen with that 53% on the Thunderbolt, but instead it's that freeze, so maybe it is enough. Nnico getting very lucky in the set, and it is still 2 Pokemon to 4, but with MetaCross frozen and on such low health, unless Raikou is removed, MetaCross is completely is out of this game, so it can just be considered a 2v3 at this point. And not only that, but Oops is effectively down to 1 Pokemon because MetaCross is not only just not doing anything, but it's taking up a slot that could be used for that Snorlax or that Latias here, which both have not been revealed, but both are very, very scary for Nnico in this position.
Yeah, so what we see here though is that Raikou and Latias definitely have an option. If he can just continue focusing down the single slot and the Metagross stays frozen, he's in a really good position here. Very smart play.
The greed here paying off, completely ignoring the threat of MetaCross potentially thawing out and earthquaking, and instead just saying, you know what, I do not care about your Zapdos. I'm going to keep getting those Carmines up, and I'm going to keep threatening your Pokemon. And Oops has to keep respecting the potential play of Raikou thunderbolting that Metagross and just saying, I'm predicting that you're going to stay here, you're going to switch. But again, that Carmine, Latias goes down, but Metagross thawing out, getting that Earthquake off, and just KOing Raikou. That is game 1. 4-0 for Oops. That is a huge game 1.
Yes.
See what Nnico does in game 2.
So just to explain that end game a little bit there, Nnico was likely assuming that there was a Snorlax in the back along with a Latias, in which case he would need significant amounts of Calm Minds to be able to beat them before they could kill his Raikou. So even though there he could have 2v1 down the Zapdos and not preyed entirely on the freeze, he was most likely assuming that in the back there was mons that he could not beat without getting too many Calm Minds up.
Yes, and that's really important here. Of course, that Metagross is threatening that Earthquake, but you just have to completely ignore it here if Nnico wants to win. Having that 2 versus 1 advantage is so important, and while that Latias did go down in the end, Zapdos was just not threatening much damage on that Raikou, so it was just a matter of time before either Raikou won the set with enough Calm Minds or Metagross thawed out and then just uses Earthquake, which was turn 8.
Nnico also had to wait for the right turn for the light screen to go down and then kill Zapdos before it could set another one up. So he was trying to play to the right time conditions, but unfortunately couldn't protect stall enough and the Metagross thawed out. So game just couldn't quite be won out.
And it's going to be quite interesting to see what Nnico does to adapt. That huge turn 1 lead for Oops completely shifted the game in his favor, and Nnico just did not have the tools to stop Raikou and Metagross, Zapdos and Metagross on the lead, my bad. Of course, there is that reveal of jolly unboosted Metagross, so there is not much damage it can deal. However, it is still MetaCross. It has the bulk, it has the damage, and it has that incredible steel psychic type being able to resist a lot of moves. But Raikou and Zapdos are not included in that list. Both Thunderbolts will completely threaten that MetaCross. Raikou having that potential Calm Mind, and Zapdos just being incredibly strong. Of course, Light Screen from Oops' Zapdos can potentially weaken how much damage is dealt, but we still don't know the speed tiers, and we do see that each Zapdos has that 322 HP that is going to be potentially them both having the same speed tier.
Yeah, so that also puts in the position of possibly how much. Oh, just wins. Immediately gets rid of the Zapdos before it can ever set up a Light Screen, and the Raikou lives the Earthquake. Beautiful turn there from Nnico, betting on his Zapdos being faster, which means he's likely running something close to max speed.
And surprisingly, MetaCross dealing 99% of that Raikou, Nnico trusting that his Raikou is correctly invested in that defense stat. Of course, Snorlax has to be that replacement to try and take as little damage from Earthquake as possible, but Nnico can now use that information, because if he had that Latias in the back, he would surely go into that instead to take little damage from the Earthquake, protect on the Zapdos as Meteor Mash from the return Thunderbolt on Raikou from
Meteor Mash misses the Raikou, important to let it stay alive and possibly 2-hit KO that Metagross. In return, Nnico gets Protect on Zapdos to block the return, so really good turn from Nnico there, getting a little bit lucky to keep the Raikou alive. However, this turn the Zapdos is threatened pretty heavily.
And another thing to note is that Nnico just hasn't really lost much progress. Yes, that Raikou is really low, it's only on 43 HP. However, Oops cannot outspeed that Raikou. He has no tools. He has now revealed that Raikou, but there is not really much that Oops can do about it. That Thunderbolt paralysis, consuming that Lumberry, that is also a big reveal, but return just completely removes Zapdos off of that critical hit. That is huge for Oops. That puts him not only back in the game, but also removes the potential reflect that Zapdos may have had.
Yeah, so the Oops gets a little bit of turnabout fair play, getting his own bit of luck, and gets a crit here to get back into it. But the Heracross is incredibly threatening to all Mons left on the field. I don't think there's a quick or easy way to remove it. However, we do know that the Metagross outspeeds it. So in an endgame position, it's not super favorable.
It is important to note that Snorlax has not revealed its item yet. We do not know if it's Quick Claw, which allows Protect, or if it is that Choice Band. Of course, that is a huge amount of damage, but it may not be enough. Heracross revealing Earthquake and completely removing Raikou here. Snorlax may be able to just punish it in return. Nope, but it is Latias being hit there, 55%, as it is down now to 30%. Heracross being able to potentially win the game on the spot though, because of that swagger threat from Latias, and we know that Metagross cannot remove that Heracross in one hit, as we saw in game 1, where Meteor Mash barely did 50%.
Yeah, so really good endgame position for Nnico here. Basically just has to hope that he doesn't get crit in a bad position, or get a Quick Claw proc if that is what the Snorlax is running. Otherwise, he has a very clear way to just clean this out, swagger into the Heracross, and then just go for a damage.
As we see Latias click that Protect, but Metagross not predicting that it will be that Latias Protect. In fact, Oops just completely banking on that Latias not protecting at all, not paying off. However, Heracross using Earthquake to remove Metagross, and then effectively Snorlax on the next turn, as we see the forfeit in game 2 from Oops, recognizing he just cannot win that game.
Yeah, important thing we did see revealed there at the end though is that the Snorlax did use Protect, so it is not running the Choice Band, which is important information for Nnico to know. Though he probably could have learned it off of the calcs that were hit on the Latios, with return doing 65% to it.
Another thing with Snorlax is that there is the Tauros on that 6th slot, which is almost always that Choice Band item, which really is counterintuitive if it is that choice band Snorlax, because Taurus really needs that choice band to deal enough damage to really leverage its speed stat. And Snorlax has a lot of items it can run. It has that quick, it has that bright powder, and even leftovers as an item. We did not see that leftovers, but Quick Claw and Bright Powder are both completely viable options on Snorlax that could be run here.
Yeah, same. That also leaves with the question of what the item on MetaCross is, because it normally would be running something like Lumberry. However, we've seen that the Raikou is running Lumberry. So we're in an interesting position here of one of the Snorlax and MetaCross is likely running Quick Claw, but we don't know which one it is yet.
As we see yet another shift from both players in Game 3. Oops having that Raikou Zapdos lead, while Nnico having that Starmie Raikou lead, same as Game 1. This is not that favourable for Nnico, but there is, of course, that Latios in the back, potentially able to just eat those Thunderbolt threats. But is Oops going to respect the Starmie here, or is he just going to use this as potential setup opportunity? And same here for Nnico, he does not really fear the Raikou or the Zapdos here, and so can just use this as Calm Mind potential to later on threaten big damage or even KOs on the Metagross or the Tauros here, as we see Starmie protecting and Raikou using that Calm Mind. A big thing to note here is Oops' Raikou actually outspeed, so potentially here we have a speed tie. Of course, we do see the HP stat being the exact same between both Raikou, which does suggest that they are both timid, and most are in fact timid in the current metagame. But it could be a slightly different set, and we just don't know. Starmie failing that double protect, but it just doesn't matter because there's no damage dealt from Oops this turn. Raikou using Calm Mind, and Zapdos replaced by that Snorlax.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing here is that even with the Raikou having two special attack boosts under Light Screen, both the opposing Raikou and the Snorlax just aren't going to be taking very much damage, which puts Oops in a very favorable position. Here we see Starmie likely going to go for a Reflect, yep, to try and keep it alive, but just great plays from Oops here, taking advantage of the passive terms by getting his own Raikou set up while he's really not under threat.
Another thing to note here is that Snorlax is just not really threatened by anything here. It can just keep using Return as much as it wants to. Yes, Reflect is going to slow down its damage, but at the end of the day, Nnico doesn't have the tools to stop Snorlax from dealing permanent damage. There isn't any recovery on any of his Pokemon, and there's no resists listed either, other than that potential Tyranitar, which does not want to be taking a +2 Thunderbolt from Raikou, which can potentially just remove it on the spot. Starmie using Protect on turn 4 as Raikou uses Crunch to potentially remove it. Raikou doing 40% and getting that crucial paralysis as Snorlax returns with its own return, dealing slightly more damage than Raikou's Thunderbolt. But important to note is that Light Screen only has one turn left, so Snorlax is potentially taking even more damage than last turn from Nnico's Raikou here.
Yeah, so it's also very possible that Nnico just tries to play the speed tie and get his own Light Screen up here, and sacks the Starmie, which could be a good play for him, especially if that Snorlax does get paralyzed. Because after this, there's not much that necessarily that Oops' team can do against Raikou if he removes that Snorlax.
Oh, but he just completely ignores the threat here and instead just double targets that Snorlax, removing it on the spot. We do see that Zapdos replacement as Starmie falls, but honestly, I think this is better off for Nnico, because now he gets in that Tyranitar or that Heracross here, or even maybe that Latias, and just is able to use the fact that Raikou is not that threatened, whereas his own Raikou is threatening a lot of damage on any Pokemon except Oops' Raikou here.
Yeah. It is important to note that based off that term, both the Raikous and the Starmie are all speed tying at max speed. So that can become a major factor here. Because we saw that Starmie was able to get off, and Nnico's Raikou went first despite going second a couple of times. So everything there was speed tying.
We do see that Heracross replacement, Nnico trusting that the bulk that he has invested will be enough to live Raiko's Thunderbolt even with 2 Carmine boosts up. We do see the light screen go now finally after 5 turns, which does mean that Zapdos may be removed on this turn for a light screen used as a replacement for the old one, but is it going to be enough for Oops? Of course, Raikou for Nnico is chipped, whereas Oops is not, but it's just so far ahead. We do see the Thunderbolt doing 90% nearly, and the paralysis is huge. Light screen going up, but Brick Break just ignoring that light screen setup and doing huge amounts of damage to Raikou. That is potentially choice band damage.
Potentially choice band, or if they're running Guts, could be the here.
That is a good note here to mention, with that Guts ability from that Thunderbolt paralysis dealing an extra 50% on top. Of course, that is enough for Raikou to be threatened as Nnico goes for his 4th Carmine this game, ignoring that Zapdos once again, even though it has that light screen to slow Raikou down. MetaCross coming in as a replacement for that Raikou. Nnico is so far ahead in this game, he's able to threaten KOs on both Pokemon here, but of course there is that Metagross threatening to just remove Raikou with that Earthquake. However, Zapdos has just used Protect, and it has that light screen threat, while Metagross has that Protect that it has not used yet, which puts Nnico in the driver's seat here.
Yeah, the interesting thing though here is that I'm interested in if the Raikou, how much damage it would do even through light screen to the Metagross, and depending on what Nnico has in the back, that may put him in a favorable position where he doesn't even have to protect. Though the fact that he there gets the light screen up. Oh!
Mega dealing enough to remove Zapdos even through the resisted hit, thanks to that critical hit, is insane. Of course, it is a strong move, that 120 base power and that stab factor, even without that Guts boost, but it is a resisted hit, and that is a Metagross. That is Zapdos, but Metagross taking 88% KOing both Pokemon, and even though Raikou did 88% damage, this is not over for Oops. It could be that Tyranitar in the back, or it could even be that Latias. Latias cannot KO. However, it is that Zapdos. But we do see that Salak Berry allowing Metagross to potentially win via some timely hacks, but it is not going to be what is seen here. Medium Mash missing Zapdos, which did not change much in the long run, but
unfortunately there, I think even with a crit, the Meteor Mash was never going to kill, so Zapdos coming out there basically sealed that endgame for Oops. Against Oops. So now we're going to see an interesting position here. In Game 1, the Starmie Raikou did not work at all. However, in this game, thanks to some good speed ties and good RNG, it worked out basically perfectly. So it'll be interesting to see here if Nnico tries to play that lead once again to move towards the same endgame, or if with some better knowledge and understanding that he will not get the same RNG every time, he tries to go for a different one.
Another thing to mention is that Thunderbolt paralysis. It is only off of that 10%, and that really came in clutch for Nnico, being able to remove Raikou with effectively one hit instead of needing a second Brick Break. And also there was the crit on that the Zapdos, which was really major here. And while he did manage to get 4 Carmine boosts up, the biggest thing was that Guts activation.
That Guts activation major. It basically eliminated the Raikou on Oops' side by getting a ton of damage into it, and with that crit just completely removed the Zapdos, making the end game basically free for Nnico.
And I think Oops will have to shift his game plan to keep in mind the Guts ability on that Heracross. Yes, Thunderbolt paralysis is very, very unlikely, but this set has been filled with unlikely happenings. We've seen multiple critical hits. We've seen paralysis from 10% moves, not once but twice in this set. We have seen so many Meteor Mash misses, which is only a 1 in 6 chance. I think we've seen more Meteor Mash misses than we've seen Meteor Mash hits.
Okay, so we do see Nnico going for the exact same lead as games 1 and 3. However, see a little bit of a change here. Oops immediately getting Zapdos out, which has been a major concern throughout this game since it was able to set up Light Screen. Oh, brutal!
The critical hit from the Raikou, and then Starmie using Ice Beam did so much damage, and having to use MetaCross of all Pokemon to take that Earthquake, which suggests that Oops has Raikou in the back. And yes, that did do a lot of damage to both Raikou and Starmie, but MetaCross is slower, and of course there is that potential Heracross in the back, which MetaCross outspeeds, which is not a good thing for Oops here.
Yeah, that's just a brutal turn. I think it's entirely possible the Thunder Beam plus Ice Beam combo, since Nnico had not really revealed Ice Beam previously on Starmie. It's entirely possible that that would have killed the Zapdos anyway, but the crit just ensured it and made it so that Oops had to take an Earthquake to his own Metagross.
As we see Metagross being replaced by Raikou, as Reflect is set up on Nnico's side and Thunderbolt hits that Raikou. Removing the Starmie, but Heracross being revealed as that Pokemon is such a bad thing for Oops to see. It threatens that Raikou, it threatens that Snorlax, and that Metagross is just not doing much with that Raikou on the field. Yes, it is chipped and potentially removed by Oops' own Raikou, but that doesn't help him in this situation when Heracross is just threatening so much damage. Raikou being replaced by that Zapdos, expecting Oops to try and remove it. Earthquake from Heracross threatening that Raikou, but Oops just does not care and uses that self-destruct, finally being revealed on that Snorlax, picking up a double KO on that Heracross and Zapdos. Raikou being left alone in a 1v2. It is so chipped though, and Oops has got that Calm Mind option, which means that it's very unlikely that he will lose this endgame unless some untimely acts happens. We do see that Calm Mind, but the critical hit from the Crunch is just enough before that potential Earthquake even happens. Of course, there was no Protect there, but that might not have mattered.
Yeah, so we just saw there how quickly fortunes can change. Nnico had a great turn 1, but one bad read in the face of Explosion completely turned the game around.
Here, I think Nnico will have to consider that in Game 5. Of course, there is that Tyrannosaurus that he still does not have revealed that has so much setup potential here. But there is also that Tauros on Oops' side that he has not revealed, and that has the ability to remove that Heracross in one hit. It has the ability to remove that Raikou in one hit. Even the Latias in one hit with that with the Hyper Beam potential. Of course, that is a 2-turn recharge move, but it is always a nice move to have. Or it could be that Double Edge. It's slightly weaker, but it means that he can always use that and then switch out, or just use it until Tauros faints.
Yeah.
This is also that Intimidate ability, slowing down that Heracross, which has done so much damage, and slowing it down in tandem with that with the Reflect from Zapdos will basically neuter Heracross before it even gets going, which Oops really needs if he wants that Raikou to be able to win here.
Yeah, so we're seeing both players have preserved at least one bond entirely worth of information before in this Game 5. As we saw in Game 4, hiding that Ice Beam until later was able to make a significant play in the game, so we'll see if both players rely on that information that they haven't shown yet.
Very standard leads here. Metagross being used over that Snorlax from Game 4, but otherwise the exact same leads we've already seen. Zapdos has that potential to set Reflect, and Metagross is threatening the Earthquake here, but Starmie and Raikou can just remove that Zapdos on the spot. Yes, we do know there's likely that Snorlax in the back, but is that going to be enough of a deterrent here? Metagross is also taking a lot of damage if it's a double up of that Thunderbolt and Hydro Pump here, and Oops really does not like that potential here. He may just lose one Pokemon if he gets it wrong, and he does just not like that. We do see the Raikou of all Pokemon though being the replacement for the Metagross. Ice Beam and Thunderbolt hitting it as Metagross uses Protect, but that is 50% taken on that Raikou, and he still has to deal with the speed type before he can even get that comment up. Yes, the Thunderbolt does threaten an Oko on the Starmie, but is that going to be enough in this position for Oops?
Yeah, we're just having an interesting position for Oops here. He had to make a 50-50 read basically there, and I think he got basically one of the better options he could get out of it. But unfortunately, it just puts him in such a rough position here of having to rely on the Hydro Pump miss. But
And if we don't see that happen, we do see that MetaCross fall down, which may have been a huge misplay for Oops here. He doesn't have the ability to use Protect to threaten that self-destruct anymore on that spot. He doesn't have any damage dealt yet, and it's already turn 3. He's lost a Pokemon. Raikou has chipped 50%, and he has all 4 Pokemon revealed. There is no Taurus in the back, which really would have been nice for Oops to have revealed here. Raikou cannot get any Carmines up because of that threat of Hydro Pump here, and Zapdos just is not doing much here. This is a really, really poor position for Oops, and Nnico has not even revealed any of his other 2 Pokemon yet.
Yeah, I would say Nnico has a relatively free T-Bolt, but we do see a double protect, and Nnico calls it by giving an attack into the Snorlax.
Oops recognizing that he has to make a lucky play here, and he gets it, getting that double protect as self-destruct hits. We do see the Zapdos and the Heracross last, but that Heracross, it just does not enjoy that double target Thunderbolt, potentially just removing it on the spot. Zapdos is going to be threatening that Thunderbolt as well onto the Raikou, but that may just not be enough in this position. Of course, we do know that Zapdos has Reflect, but that is just not doing much here. That the Heracross may not remove Raikou in one hit, but Thunderbolt plus Brick Break is going to be enough. Brick Break, it also ignores Reflect on the turn it hits. So unless there's an Earthquake here, which will remove Raikou anyway, it will not matter. So Oops has to keep that in mind here.
Yeah, right now it's again probably down to 50-50s that Nnico has to call in order to get it right. Though that Heracross took the Thunderbolt remarkably well. And now we're in a much more favorable position.
And we do potentially see a 50-50 here. We do not know what that Heracross's 4th move is. We have seen that Mega Horn, we've seen the Earthquake, we've seen the Brick Break. We just don't know the last move yet. Zapdos using Detect to try and scout, and it is likely not Rock Slide here, as Heracross uses Brick Break yet again. Thunderbolt outspeeding on Nnico's side though, removing Oops's Zapdos, and that is going to be game, set, and match 3-2 for Nnico.
Yes, very interesting endgame there. Oops made some great calls and relied on a bit of RNG to try and get close there, but ultimately Heracross and Zapdos were just too bulky on Nnico's side and were able to close out the game. So thank you all so much for watching. That has been Mount Battle Round 3 in favor of Nnico Iosi.